Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition for the week, where we go over high-level thinking, theory, kind of overarching themes, and try and tie them back to lean stuff, lean principles. I'm Devin Bedoni of Like and Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing.
And you have a fantastic quote for us this week.
Neither the voice of authority nor the weight of reason and argument are as significant as experiments, for thence comes quiet to the mind. From Roger Bacon.
So good.
So good. We used a butchered version of this quote quite a while ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I
butchered it.
I typed it in. I thought he was going somewhere else and I changed it. But I was actually having this conversation very recently with some people about kind of as you're planning a project, I feel like I get this sort of nagging feeling in my head about certain elements that just feel unsettled, where I'm just like concerned that they won't actually pan out.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of other aspects of the project, I know, like I feel comfortable because I know that there is going to be a good option, even if we haven't nailed it.
Uh-huh.
But there's somewhere you're just like, I'm not sure this will work as a premise, like just point blank. So we're doing our rebranding, currently sort of figuring out packaging and all this stuff. And we settled on this concept of printing out like tissue paper or wrapping paper or some type of paper with like a cool logo-y pattern or like blueprints of the buckles, like something cool. Like graphically they looked really cool, these concepts.
Yeah.
And then it was sort of keeping me up at night, where I was trying to imagine doing a nice job of wrapping these small buckles in a full sheet of paper and having that look like dialed instead of like, I don't know, just
like crumpled paper.
Yeah, exactly. And then I was like, okay, well, if we get heavier paper, like they won't look wrinkly. But then if we're wrapping like just one small, like 18-inch strap in that, it's going to look really lumpy and like too much.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that aspect was just kind of like irking me. And I feel like this quote sort of gets to like, there's nothing quite like, so in doing projects, I always try to zoom in on those aspects of like, what is the crux of this problem? Can I demonstrate that it will work or not work quickly now? And then we can figure out the rest. But like, until we see it, so I liked that, brings quiet to the mind. Yeah. With automation too, I feel like I had the same thing where it's like, I was talking about doing a flip station, and I really wasn't sure whether the handoff seemed like the challenge of like both grippers acting on one part at once. Like what are the problems? And just seeing that, like once you see that, I remember the moment I was like ecstatic because it did it. Now there was a lot of other stuff to figure out to get that automation to run smoothly over the long term, but I knew the rest was
viable. Where this kind of comes back to for me is there's a lot of examples this is out of Toyota Kata.
It is.
There's a lot of examples in that book of like basically of comparing, contrasting sort of the typical problem solving methodology of like kind of just discussion and versus like the whole A3 process, coming up with measurable experiments and testing your results. And it all like makes a lot of sense. And, I was kind of like, like I can see how that kind of discussion, making style or problem solving through discussion style, like could be a problem. But I was, in the back of my head, I was kind of always like, but it doesn't seem like it's, we've done pretty good. And then having like post reading that. And now when we like get into that style of problem solving, I'm just like, this is utter chaos. And it's like stressful now.
Yeah. I think because of this, because you just realize, you get this like tingly sense of the assumptions being made or something.
Yeah. And it's just like so open-ended and roundabout. And
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just like having having a counterpoint to that, like the like sureness of purpose, or clarity of purpose, and like it's just very it's very comforting.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've actually I 100% agree. I think sorry, we're getting some crackling in the lines here. I just read chapter 5 of Toyota Kata, and I think you're like a week ahead of me, or 2 weeks or something.
Only for a day or two, because I read it very slow.
Yeah, so I think something that popped into my head I wanted to run by you. So they have a flashlight analogy for this, where if you're in a dark room and the flashlight is as far as you can sort of see with your current knowledge, speculating and planning the whole process beyond where the flashlight can reach, you're just not going to succeed. And actually, if you're in a dark room, you have to take a step forward to see new obstacles. Yeah. And that was sort of their point of, like, that was their analogy of this idea of like not planning out a lot, like how you're going to get somewhere. Another analogy was like if you're on an airplane and you're at 30,000 feet and the target condition is to land the airplane on the runway. Yeah. You would be quite dismayed to find out that the pilot has a plan that they're not going to deviate from between then and the runway, right? And so like any gusts of wind or changes in whatever airplane stuff, I don't really know about.
Got this locked and loaded.
Yeah, we're sticking to the plan and this is what we're doing. Yeah. Would be foolish and concerning. And so like you have to just sort of start and understand where you're trying to get and keep making little changes.
Yeah.
They also mentioned in that book that Toyota does not plan out like long sort of like they don't make long plans, which is interesting because that is coupled with this idea that they do a ton of planning. And so I was sort of, and this is a total question and I don't know enough about this, but
well, they have very long like targets.
Exactly. And so I was sort of thinking maybe the 90%. Okay, so I've been struggling with this idea of like 90% of the time should be planning and 10% is execution. Because it's kind of like, well, what are we planning? Because we simultaneously are being told don't make plans because you need to do experiments to figure out what the next experiment needs to be. Right. And so you shouldn't be planning. And so looking at the A3, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but there's, I would say 2/5 of it is where people spend 85% of their time in the countermeasures and execution, right? And they're not doing the current condition, and they're not doing the like root cause analysis, and they're not doing a target condition. Or
there's the current condition. There's also the problem statement, which
is sort of like root cause. Well, yeah,
it's separate, and I found that like it's actually kind of hard to nail down sometimes. Like people are like, I know this is not working correctly, and you're like, how? And they're like, well, it's not working correctly, and you're like, how?
Interesting.
Which is separate from why, which is root cause. Right. But even like nailing down prior.
That's true. We spent quite a while. I thought it would be simple, and we sort of wrote out the A3s we've done. Yeah. I can think of a couple where we wrote out a problem, and we were like, well, that's not exactly the problem because it doesn't account for this side. So anyway, in all those things, most problem solving, I would say that I've experienced misses 3 out of 5. Yeah. Pretty much entirely. Yeah. And so I was sort of thinking, I don't know that really carefully observing the problem and like quantifying the current state and understanding the root causes, I don't think that becomes obsolete. And so I wonder if that's where you should be spending, like the 90% planning is like, okay, we have a very deep understanding of the whole, like all the parts here and what the issue, not where we're going, not how we solve this, but just like I was sort of thinking that doesn't feel like time that would be you'd realize was a waste, whereas I have seen frequently teams spend a long time planning how to get from 30,000 feet down to the runway. whether that's a product launch or whatever it is.
Sure.
And then they've spent a really like an inordinate amount of time on the whole plan.
Yeah.
And then they take the first step and realize there were some deep assumptions there that are incorrect.
Yeah. You can sort of do the same. You could even think about it as maintaining the same ratio, but chunking it instead of trying to do the entirety in one go.
What do you mean?
Like, you could have the same plan to execution ratio as the team trying to get from 30,000 feet to the runway in terms of like total planning time, total execution time, but you're chunking it into these little bits where you're like, okay, we're going to get from 30,000 feet down to 28.
Yeah.
We're going to spend 90% planning, 10% execution, go, and then see where we end up.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is I think the key point is not necessarily the ratio, like the total ratio. It's how you break it down.
I think there's that, but I think what I'm saying, or what I was sort of thinking about, which feels relevant, is where you're spending your time.
Uh-huh.
And if as a group you're spending your time speculating as to like, I think we should buy this cart off of Uline, and it's like, well, I think that cart is going to have trouble on this. Like, that's just very, like, it's minutia. It doesn't matter. Right. Because you have no idea what problem you're trying to solve. You're not clear on the target condition. You're not clear on the root causes of why there's a difference between the target condition and your current state.
Yeah.
You have no idea what your current state really is.
Yeah.
And that spending time as a team, really thinking deeply on those things, I suspect will not, like, those things don't become obsolete. I think is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's true, but it does feel like a much lower risk place to dedicate a lot of team time. I guess. Whereas spending a lot of time as a team planning out one of many like mitigation strategies.
Right.
Like, let's design a desk all together. It's like, well,
yeah.
What are we trying to do?
Yeah.
What is this desk for? Anyway, that was just a thought.
Yeah. Interesting. Sort of on this topic, I wrote in here that A3s breed like rabbits. Which is like, maybe it's in part like the nature of starting and like the fact that we don't have a good comprehension of our current condition. And so like anytime you do an A3, you end up with like five other topics that need to be A3'd. Which is also, on the one hand, very exciting. On the other hand, totally overwhelming.
For sure.
But what it's kind of brought me around to was that that having like a uniform purpose and strategy driving your A3, like your improvement process, I think is really, really important, because it would be very easy to like pick one randomly. Like, we're going to work on this today. And then it breeds 5 more. And then they're like, oh, okay, we got a lot of problem solving to do here. You jump into those, each of those breeds 5 more. All of a sudden you're like super deep in time, resources, and energy and attention into maybe something that's a little bit tangential to what's key in your business. Okay. And so
you're saying this is why you need a challenge or target condition in general, like a big picture. Here's where we're trying to get to.
Yeah. Okay. You need to have a big picture target. You need to have also, I think, a clear idea of kind of where the key, I don't really want to use the word bottlenecks, but where the key sort of like issues are in your business that need to be handled.
I've been really struggling with this specifically, which I've talked about, but it's like working on continuous improvement in this sort of small way, small not being a negative, just like these small improvements. Yeah. When there's fundamental changes that need to happen to the business. Yeah. And it feels a little bit like knowing that there may be big shifts in the future, like polishing this. We know it's a bad mechanism now. We know we need to change it in a major way. Let's refine it in a minor way. Just feels like a waste of time. And I don't know how to square that with the fact that like practicing that and building that into your culture is not a waste of time.
Right. I think there's a delicate balance there, because you're learning from all of those little experiments and you may end up altering the assumption of how you're going to end up rebuilding that process through those little refinements. So on the one hand, it's not totally wasted. I think I was just noticing that there would be an incredible potential to just myopically focus in on some small thing, because you're like, well, there's so much to be done here. Yeah. And you never even get a chance with a limited workforce to kind of tackle some of the other big picture things. And so, anyway, it's just something that came to my attention this last week, was looking at the number of items that ended up on the board as future A3 topics just from having done 2 A3s. And I was like, okay, we need to
make sure we don't get lost in this.
Getting lost in the soup is a very, very real possibility.
I think something I've noticed as a total upside to A3, even when you are just getting it very much brings to your attention how little you know about the business or about some aspect of the business, in terms of what is the problem? What is our target condition? Having those be measurable is really hard, all that stuff. And it just clarifies the fact that there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of potential in sort of unlocking that. Yeah. But I think it really brings you back to the fact that you can't know in a funny way. And so we have to just make these little experiments. Yeah. I think it sort of removes the illusion of being able to make a complete plan from 30,000 feet to the runway, kind of. Yeah. We're just okay, we're not going to know all of this. Let's try a little something.
Yeah. And I think the key part is knowing we're trying to hit that runway. Yeah. Versus just being we're flying. Yeah. Right?
Right.
Keep
flying.
Yeah, keep flying. And I think having that runway target is super key. You can kind of think Toyota has this underlying one by one single piece flow target that's the never achievable. It's the runway that keeps moving along the earth as you get closer to it, sort of. Right. But it's always a touch point to come back to and be okay, we're working on this. Does this move us closer to that? Yes or no? It's kind of a simple statement. And I had a talk with the crew yesterday of being what do you your gut sense? What is the single most important things that we need to work holding us back in this business right now? What's obvious to you guys, just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page. That's a good question, right? Thankfully, we were all on the same page. I wonder how much I've influenced everyone being on that page, but I think kind of bringing those things to the top of the ladder as most critical, and trying to assign A3 projects based on how they move us closer to that is going to become pretty key. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. This reminds me, your runway. Sorry, I was Googling here. Your runway keeps moving. There's I think it's Zeno's paradox. A frog on a table. Every jump, he jumps halfway to the edge of the table. Oh. So he never gets there. Yeah. And that's kind of what the exercise is. Sure. Yeah. It's like a spiral. A spiral never ends.
Yeah.
I think because it's the same kind of thing. It's a ratio of where it was before and it continuously gets smaller or larger.
Right. Yeah. And then especially as you shift the target condition, because you learn a lot along the way.
Yeah. Or the classic is we're here, and everyone, then it's well, then you didn't think of what here was well enough.
Right. Right. Yeah. And last thing in this, well, not the last thing by any means, but another thing in this book, in this chapter that stuck with me was that any process that is not striving for a target condition will be decaying. Yeah. and the need to have every process have a target. It's a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
But it's also an interesting. I see the need for a solution to that problem, where it does definitely feel like things that don't have ongoing attention start to backslide.
Yeah.
And I wonder if instead of the need for attention, I wonder if this is a better, more viable solution of just like, if you go to a process, you can read on the wall next to that process what the target condition is and sort of what it is at now. And so there is, everywhere you touch, there is a feeling of like movement.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, we had kind of a harsh reminder of that last week. We had, I don't know, 6-8 months ago, set up kind of like, and we talked about it on the podcast here, set up kind of like a preliminary QC strategy for checking parts out as they come off the machine. And we'd talked about it. We'd sort of established a baseline. We put the physical things in place that needed to be there. And then because my two operators, or my two employees at the time, are just like attentive, capable people, they stopped doing it to the standard, to our theoretical standard.
Right.
But because they're good at what they do, we didn't really have any issues. And then we brought on a new person, and there was no communication of that standard or expectation, and our new person didn't know of any of the things to look at because they're new. Yeah. And it was, to the point where we didn't even talk about it. I didn't personally, because I wasn't right there doing that.
Right.
And so we scrapped a bunch of parts. Not a big deal. I mean, kind of a bummer, but like not a big deal.
Right.
But very good, like, reality check to be like, okay, why did this happen? Oh, because we weren't even doing what we said we were doing.
Right.
Much less striving to improve that process or operation.
Yeah.
And needing to come back to, we'd kind of like set this thing in place and then never revisited, A, was it working? B, how could it be improved? And C, what's the end goal of that? Initially it was just like, we need to not pass bad parts. That's sort of like a very baseline goal.
Pie in the sky.
Yeah.
Useful pie in the sky.
Useful. But it was interesting just to come back to that. Like, okay, so if you don't maintain them or actively pursue betterment within the operation, it will decay and just kind of become nothing.
Yeah. And I think like all of this becomes very quickly extremely overwhelming, because it, like, having said that and just thinking about going about my day today. Yeah. I know I'm not going to do that. Sure. I'm not going to be improving all processes all the time. Yeah. And I think this is like very helpful to me, is coupling this useful approach with also useful approach, which is Eliyahu Goldratt's theory of constraints, which is you should only be improving the constraint because the rest is waste. I don't agree necessarily with the premise in terms of building an organization, but in the reality at each node in the organization of a person, I think that is a useful filter for everyone to focus their efforts a little in whatever is appropriate for them. Yeah. So like if you're the CEO, your focus might be very different than a technician. Yeah. But still everyone is going to have a ton of opportunities for things that they can drastically improve, or things they can A3 to understand at a deeper level, or any of those things. Yeah. And so you're going to have to pick. And so I think that's a useful, just kind of like, all right. Yeah. I'm not going to do it all, and I shouldn't. I guess I feel like I've slowed myself down a little bit. I don't know if I have any regrets, but
on improvements, you mean?
Slowed myself down by doing improvements on things that will legitimately grow the business, not just refine what I have currently. Yeah. It's different, I think, if you're a big player in a space with like a significant market share to go like, okay, can we do this but make more profit?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't think about that at all, right? About the difference between revenue and profit. Like,
yeah.
There's all that, but
Or I
I
think
am
a lot of
so
people,
small right now that it doesn't, like, improving my efficiency on my current product offering is not going to be as impactful to the business as launching new products.
Yeah.
And I think I lost sight of that to some extent, a little bit, or a lot of it. I've learned a lot, and I think we are in a much better place to move forward. So that's why I say, like, I don't know that I would do it differently.
Yeah.
Well, I probably would, because I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and like tying back to the, like, how do you fit the improvements in? Who does them? When do they happen?
Yeah.
There was, well, one kind of an outflow of the discussions we had in our shop was like, okay, we've been doing these A3s. This is fun. Now we need to create some, like, structured time in which to tackle all of the, like, items that come up that actually need to be worked on.
Right.
Like, it's not just going to happen. And that was a point a little bit later in Toyota Kata, was that, like, there's a common misconception about who is doing improvement efforts. And which I thought was really interesting, that Toyota had this quote, or, you know, from someone in the organization or somewhere in the organization, that expecting operators to produce product while autonomously simultaneously improving their process is disrespectful. Yeah. Because that's just not realistic, which was good to hear, because I think that's, like, a common theme in this discussion of, like, at this scale, how do you juggle all of this stuff? Right. How do you make the time for it? And I think the reality is that the only way that a business of our scale can do that is to literally shut down production at times to make time to do improvement efforts. Which seems pretty key. And I think the reason that those larger organizations can be improving all aspects all the time is because they very, like, literally have a whole nother layer in their org chart that's dedicated to multiple layers. That's dedicated to improving processes. So it's kind of like their production and their improvements can happen simultaneously. So it's like, it's almost two different worlds completely in terms of, well, how things can happen. Right.
They do have more. Yeah. I say no only because there is a huge focus on making sure that the people doing the process are the ones improving the process. Kind of. Ish.
I think,
like anything, there's the
way I read it was that of the total, well, the quote was that of the total improvements made on a given process, items that were inspired by or taken or executed by operators was 10% of the total.
Interesting. Right.
And that a lot of those are just, like, suggestions that came from the operators that were then implemented and executed by the team leader, group leader, manufacturing engineer team back into the system. So I think the point of the book was, like, it's more about teaching them how to think in that way, less about them actually, like, doing the thing. Which was a little, it was a little comforting, honestly, to be like, obviously we got to change the part in the machine. Like, right. You can do little things here or there, but it's when you're running a process, you need to be thinking about the process, but you also just have to continue to run the process, and having other people or dedicated time to improve the process is key. Yeah, right. So we're sort of getting to that end result by setting aside time instead of it all happening all at once. Hopefully setting aside time, which, like, hopefully. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, lately, just for full transparency, we are so busy with new projects and production that, like, it's been hard to do improvements. Yeah. Not because it's like we don't have time, but more I look at the improvements and I'm like, I'd rather work on these other projects because it's going to really significantly move the needle instead of this, which is like, yeah, over time it's going to be useful, but
Yeah.
I don't know. So I don't know how to think about that, but I think it's all important. And I think like what I've come to is that it's all good and that I should never end up spending 100% of my time on working in the business, because it's important that you also work on the business.
Yeah.
And that in the long term, like this is a very short term view of like, once I hit that target,
Yeah.
it's going to be great for the business. If I'm not spending any time thinking about like, okay, what's the target condition? Like that we maybe release products faster. What are the things
Yeah.
that I can fix? I think that is in the long term a mistake. But I don't know how to balance the short term and the long term.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the bank account is one critical barometer.
Yeah. I think what it was just bringing me around to is just that, like, if you're going to have an expectation that these things happen, you can't expect it to just happen. You have to really, especially as like kind of the leader of the business, the team, like put your money where your mouth is and be like, I'm going to pay y'all to do this many hours per week. This is when we're doing it.
Yeah.
Not just like, hey, we need to do this, but yeah, we also need to ship those parts. Like they're obviously going to see where your priorities are at.
For sure. I mean, to quote Grimsmo, I feel like what gets measured gets managed. And I see this a lot. It's very easy to have meetings where the takeaways are these big picture items, but then the day-to-day, minute-to-minute, all the emphasis is on something completely different. Like people aren't idiots. Yeah. They're going to be like, okay, I see what I'm actually getting measured on.
Yeah.
You know, when there's these big like quarterly initiatives or whatever at like some big corporations, I feel like you hear about this and all the workers are kind of like, whatever, like this too shall pass.
We know the score, guys.
Yeah. Like I forget what book it's in. They were talking about like, I think it was Shigeo Shingo in a study of the Toyota production system. He was saying that like companies try on aspects of the Toyota production system, like a new set of clothes, but they don't fit because the company's like overweight. And so they go like, well, this isn't comfortable. And they discard the clothes after a month.
That's a hilarious analogy.
Yeah.
And very apt, I think.
Yeah.
I had just a random tidbit that I thought was curious. The QR code was invented by Toyota.
No way.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I guess Denso, which is a Toyota group, like subsidiary, I think, for use in Kanban. Because
well, look at that.
Look at that. There was, I guess, multiple goals. One was something that would be readable even after it had been, in significant contact with dirt and dust and grease and stuff, so more readable by a machine. And then also just the information density is much higher. So apparently pre-QR code, every Kanban at Toyota had 9 different barcodes that had to be scanned.
Wow. And
they were able to combine that all into one QR code.
Wow.
If you look at it, just after our last episode, I was like, I wonder what all these different, did a little bit of reading about Toyota Kanban, and there's still some barcodes on them, but there's like one QR code at the center that I think is like yeah.
Interesting. That's so cool, because I think it shows you I guess my thinking immediately is just like they were clearly A3ing that problem.
Yeah.
Like they were thinking about it on a deep level to then go invent a new technology for.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're in the car making business, not the like communications business, sort of.
Yeah.
But they're actually passing a huge amount of information around.
Yeah.
And I feel like they really identified a root cause of a lot of waste. And then solved it. That's very cool.
Yeah, it was kind of amazing.
Yeah.
I was like, just Wikipediaing this stuff and went down some links.
Here's what you were reading.
I mean, it was like 10 minutes over tea kind of thing, but this like kind of popped to the surface in that 10 minutes over tea, and I was like, oh wow, that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
It was cool. Yeah, the information flow aspect is really coming to the fore again in our business, especially now that we have another person to integrate, and we're having to rethink kind of like how all of our handoffs is not quite the right word, but like we've just added a level of complexity of like who's doing what, just by the very nature of there being one more person in the flow.
Yeah.
Well, simultaneously we're trying to do more all the time, as it were. And so it's becoming obvious to everyone that like we're doing a lot of like mental, sifting of like what's next and where do I need to be, and is that in Devin's head? Maybe I should check with Devin to see what's actually a priority next.
Right.
So that's kind of another target that we don't have a target yet. We're ruminating on what the target should be there for how we have a clear prioritization and information flow of that.
I look forward to the solution. I think it's something I've been thinking about a lot. I think I mentioned last week, like building a shelf and realizing that like shelves are for storing information and products. I think there's a huge emphasis in shops and manufacturing in general, or really any office work too, of how the work product moves. Who has, like, you owe me a draft of that email, or you, like, rather than on the information flow through the shop of how does anyone know what they're meant to do, or when they need a thing, how do they get that thing? Do they have to go talk to someone who then talks to someone else? And I was kind of wondering on my ride over here, what do you think an audit would show in terms of how people spend their time? I bet
in my business or anywhere,
gathering and dealing with information is a very substantial portion, but I think all of of our day, but I think most of the focus is on not that. Like that feels right. It's
right.
And
it's the classic, like 80% of waste, and it's invisible and we don't focus on
you like
refining it.
Totally. Like when you're building work cells, I think all of the thought for me historically has been like ergonomics and where is this going and where is that getting stored and all that, and much less on how visible is the information or the state of this cell or any of that. So like one thing we've been thinking about is we're going to be rebuilding our assembly and shipping area because we're adding product to it, and we just did an audit yesterday. And it's not the best, which is great. I mean, it's good to like just know exactly what we're doing now. We sort of drew a physical map, listed out every single step, and then put those numbers on the map. And it's like, oh, that one's over there. That one's over there. That one's back on, you're walking back and forth a lot.
Yeah.
And a big issue with this has to do with the fact that we're then mixing in other tasks.
Yeah.
So like you're doing some shipping, but then the CNC stops running. So you have to go reload the CNC, and then this timer goes off. So you have to move these parts out of the oven and like get them on the, so you're getting interrupted a lot. And the risk there that I see, not the risk, it's hard to get interrupted like that and still be efficient.
Yeah.
And part of the reason it's hard, I think, is because when you come back to the station of like shipping, it's very unclear where you left off. Because the station does not make it evident. And so one fix to this, potentially, just to jump right into fixing instead of really understanding, hypothetically, one solution could be that moving to single piece flow, true single piece flow. Like right now we batch assembly of the buckles. So if someone orders like 4 of this color combo and then 4 of this other one, we'll assemble 4 of the first color, then cut the webbing and sew and wind and pack. But if you're batching like that, there isn't linear progress exactly. And and so maybe moving to single piece flow would help with that. Maybe not, but
sure.
It's just interesting thinking about building a station that you walk up to and it's very clear what the next step is, instead of going like, all right, all the tools are at hand and ergonomic, but I have no idea what's happening here.
Thinking to what you just said, I'm not sure that like actually gets at the root of the problem.
Yeah, probably not.
I think you've just broken it down into a smaller completable task. So it's kind of like
true.
You've just
right.
I think
you've moved the problem.
You've moved the problem. The advantage there is being like you can finish the task at hand in an amount of time that's reasonable before needing to be interrupted to go do the other thing. And you come back to a new task.
Right.
Whereas the fundamental problem is highlighting where in the process you are, regardless of whether it's
that's true.
Single piece flow or batch.
That's a good point. I think where I was getting hung up on thinking this through is that if you batch buckle assembly and you get interrupted midway through, say you need to make 4 and you make 3, when I walk back up to the station, I don't know what the target was. I don't know if we were meant to make 4 or 3, and so now I have to check.
Sure.
Whereas if I know that one buckle is being assembled at any given point, you can look for where that process is and then complete it. And so there's no variability. You've sort of broken it down to a fundamental level in a funny way.
I mean,
but to your point,
you still have to answer the 4 or 3 question.
Well,
somewhere.
Well, you'd go, that would be a step is like, what do I do next? And that would be taken care of there. But I think to your point, which is correct and opens up a lot of new possibilities, if we start solving for that problem of letting the operator know what the target is and where the process is, it opens up the solution space pretty significantly.
Yeah, I think so.
In a very useful way, because maybe we're not at a fundamental, that's not actually fundamental, what I just said, because maybe you're only assembling buckles, or maybe you're doing straps, or maybe, and so really taking care of,
or maybe right now for your constraints, a small batch process actually is the correct way to go.
Right.
And solving this other problem is really key.
For sure.
For the moment.
Something we've been talking about, and we should probably wrap this up pretty shortly here.
Yep.
Something we were just talking about again, which I'm very excited to tackle. I think it's going to make a huge difference and sort of touches on this like contradiction of planning versus pull.
Yeah.
We're going to try to figure out a schedule, like a 2-day schedule on the side of our CNC that the machining Kanbans get laid into so that we can make sure that stuff is getting run over lunch and stuff is getting run at the end of the day. And we can do prototyping. And so if we lay it all into a schedule, we can start to very clearly see what needs to happen when.
Right.
And also the reason to do 2 days instead of 1, and this is probably premature, like we should probably think more deeply on this, is to be able to immediately see the impact of errors. So like if we fail to reload the machine quickly, you're going to see that the whole schedule gets pushed, and suddenly we can't start this tonight. We're going to have to push it to tomorrow.
How does 2 versus 1 do that?
Just because like when we leave the shop, there's a hard threshold.
Yeah.
And if stuff gets pushed over that threshold, it lands completely in tomorrow's workday, not just shifted back by 15 minutes in a funny way. And so I think it will just show that it cascades to tomorrow very significantly, where it pushes everything back by like 2 hours by that full runtime, not by the 15 minutes we just lost because we didn't immediately arrive at the machine to change it over.
Interesting. That's cool. You're kind of taking the concept or the like prioritization of Kanban concept that was brought up in the book, combining with block scheduling effectively.
Yeah.
To create a standard that allows you to do all the things you need to do.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, yeah, I'm sure we'll figure out what's wrong with it. Something that's popped into my head a few times lately, and I would love if anyone knows about this. You place an order with McMaster-Carr. They ship the order.
Yes.
Within like a ridiculously short amount of time. Which means they had available capacity for your order.
In terms of a labor to pack and ship?
Yeah. How do you do that without having people standing around? Or do you just count on having some excess capacity because timeliness is an essential part of what they bring to the table?
Yeah.
But just in general, in companies, it feels like there's this deep fundamental challenge of having, you almost inherently need excess bandwidth to deliver in a timely fashion. And I don't understand how people, I'm sure, I would imagine that there's a lot of theory and thinking on this, and it just seems really challenging to me.
Is that an Eliyahu Goldratt thing that if you size your capacity perfectly to your throughput, you will always be late, effectively.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. So what's the answer? Do I want to have people idle, or do you fill that with like what are people doing at big corporations that need to have available bandwidth? Are they working on improvements the rest of the time? Are they?
Yeah. I think Eliyahu Goldratt was referring more to machinery, but I think it applies across the board.
Yeah, for sure. Right.
Yeah.
It just feels like if I want to be able to say yes most of the time and then deliver in a timely fashion, that inherently means I have more capacity than demand.
Yeah.
But then that feels like waste and also financially difficult.
Yeah. Yes. So that's based on an assumption, which is that there are no downsides to having capacity that matches demand. Like, I think we have this idea that, like, you will achieve this. I think the assumption is that it costs more because you're not recognizing the costs of
not having capacity
of the current state. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I should go buy another machine and hire more people.
Yeah, basically. Machines solve
Send
all.
a quick email.
Yeah. Does that make sense though? Like, I think there's a lot of hidden waste of being under capacity or at capacity that we're not aware of because we don't actively see like the effects of being late, right? Like, we're just late and we're like, dang it, we're late. We shipped that a little bit late. We don't see, like, in hard dollar amounts the money that we didn't make.
Right, and we're not in the conversations of people being like, oh, they're pretty slow on shipping, let's not do this thing.
All the things. Or just like the added cost of people being overburdened and ineffective.
Right.
So I think, I don't know, I have a suspicion that that's a key part of it.
Right.
Is just, we don't see the costs of being what we imagine being as like matched capacity, in reality being under capacity, and
the costs are not evident.
Yeah.
Whereas the other cost of buying a machine or of hiring someone, like those costs
we're hypersensitive
apparent.
to an idle person or an idle machine because we see that check going out.
Right.
And we see them
instead of
there.
the lack of a check coming in or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Interesting.
So everybody go buy more equipment.
Definitely.
Or scale back your orders, maybe is probably the better.
Scale back which orders?
Your incoming, like, say no to more things so you can more effectively.
But that feels like the challenge. Like, if you went on McMaster and you said checkout and they're like, sorry, we're not going to take your order.
Sure, but
It'd be frustrating.
Yeah, but like, I guess it's like right sizing for your current scale.
Uh-huh.
Like, there was probably a time when McMaster was small and someone was like, can I buy paper towels? And they were like, no, we're a hardware store.
Right.
And now they're like, you're like, can I buy?
So figuring out like your ideal customer or something like that.
I think just like matching the flow of orders coming in to what you're capable of actually putting out.
Yeah.
In an effective way.
Interesting.
I don't really know what I'm talking about.
Same. Well, on that note.
Yes, on that note. We had a new Patreon member, Matt Blackwell. Thanks, our friend.
Thanks for the support.
Yes, indeed.
And on that note, we have a Patreon.
Indeed.
The link is in the description. Please check it out. Support this if you get value from it.
Indeed. You can find me on Instagram at lichen_MFG, on the internet at lichenprecision.com.
And you can find me at austeremfg.com and austere_manufacturing on Instagram, and the podcast at Incremental CI on Instagram. Reach out, drop us a line, let us know what you think, things we've missed, things we should know about. Yeah.
We'll talk to you soon.